All right, let's jump right into it. Thank you, everybody, for attending episode 40 in Let's Talk Recruiting, where peer practitioners get together and kind of talk shop on various topics. Today's topic is building your recruiting team, train up or let go. I kind of think that I named it the wrong thing because I think everybody is for training up versus letting go. I'm like, have you never been part of a team that had to cut somebody loose? But anywho, we could
Definitely that will come up as well. I was trying to keep it positive in the intro.
maybe we'll get into the concept of self-managing, but yeah, we'll get into that. But yeah, it's a good vibe today with everybody talking about the training up, and we're going to kind of go through some ways to do just that. So we have members from across, I think we're a bi-coastal group today. Matthew Liptek out of Boston. We have Brandon Diem. Am I getting that last name right, Brandon?
Yes, you got it.
Perfect. The DC area, Brenda Turn out of Portland, and Melissa Berdrano out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and I am just outside of the Los Angeles area. So with that said, Matt, I'm going to jump over to you first if you want to kind of jump in on your key item.
Sure. My name is Matthew Liptak. I'm out of Boston. As Sean mentioned, I'm part of a company called Mimecast. We're an email security company, and I'm the director of talent acquisition there. I head up a team of North America recruiters. I have a counterpart that sits in the UK, and she actually manages all of Europe and the rest of the world. So training up. So the big topic here, I specifically want to talk about my current team. I inherited a team here of recruiters that are all mid-level to junior level recruiters. And the biggest thing that's come up lately is that they were very transactional recruiters, and I'm trying to get them out of the mindset and train and mentor them to be more so true talent advisors, talent acquisition advisors, true talent acquisition specialists. Transactional recruiting is what they've done. They've shuffled resumes to hiring managers. They've kind of sat back and waited till hiring managers responded. And what I'm trying to change is their mindset when it comes to going into intake meetings, talking to hiring managers about their roles, and really having a seat at the table when it comes to talent management and headcount, and talking to these hiring managers about where they're going to pipeline candidates into the positions and so forth, and where they're going to find these candidates and the pulse on the market. And I think that they're starting to change a little bit, but I think that that's a big concept that I'm trying to put in place here to get that across. As well, we're trying to put in place good communication and presentation skills for these recruiters. I'm hiring a coach to actually coach the recruiting team on how they can present in a more improved fashion to these hiring managers to get their point across, to actually come across as a credible resource for the hiring managers. And that's two main areas that we're trying to train the recruiting team up in. And I've seen this in several other areas, but get them out of the mindset of that transactional, typical recruiters that I've seen coming into organizations.
Matt, are you finding that, and I totally know what you mean by the transactional piece of it, is that kind of across all levels of experience? And by levels, I mean years in the business. Is it specific to recruiters or across the board?
Yeah, I think it is across the board. I think coming in, I see this a lot. I've managed other teams, and recruiters coming in, a lot of recruiters I've managed are coming out of the agency side, and they have that agency mentality of, hey, I'm gonna find a resume, I'm gonna give it to a hiring manager, I'm gonna wait till they respond, and I'm gonna see what they say about the resume, and if they want to set up an interview, that's fine. They're not specifically thinking about strategies, about talking about pipelines, about where they're finding candidates, about what, if the hiring manager comes back and said, I'm not particularly loving this resume, or I'm not particularly loving the candidates you're finding, what are different strategies that recruiter can present to the hiring manager in order to change the mindset of the hiring manager? Get that hiring manager to think in different ways, step outside the box and think of different strategies. Become an advisor, I think. And that's definitely a different mentality that the recruiters are starting to see, and they're starting to think about. They're used to thinking in a way of, this is what I've done. I found a resume from sourcing it. I present it to a hiring manager, and I'm waiting for the response. I'm not talking to the hiring manager of why I liked that resume, what I liked about the skill set in that resume, why I chose that background for the hiring manager, what resources I'm using, where I'm going to find candidates, where I'm sourcing candidates, and what the market's looking like for that particular skill set.
Are you finding that your recruiters are partnering with your hiring managers in the intake meeting, asking them for sourcing strategies and how they can actually better work together as a true partnership rather than everything coming from the recruiting team?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that the hiring managers were really hungry at this company when I got here for more advice, more knowledge, more strategy. They, when I met with hiring managers when I came into this position, they asked for more communication. They weren't getting that communication funnel from the recruiters. They weren't getting that portal that they could ask questions and they could get feedback from the recruiters about the market. And I think that changing the mindset and making sure that these recruiters are truly, like you mentioned, partners with the hiring manager, that's a better mindset to be in. And
I feel like when the hiring managers get a value add from the recruiting team and they see that, they can go to the recruiting team for a lot of the market insights that they wouldn't otherwise find, since the recruiters are on the front lines oftentimes and know way more than the hiring teams or hiring managers themselves. I think just establishing that foundation of that true two-way partnership is so crucial in the success of recruiting for top talent.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that they get stuck on is the fact that, are they supposed to be doing that? Is that really my job? Should I be doing that? Am I supposed to be guiding a hiring manager? They've been doing this for a long time. Hey, I tell them the same thing. You are an expert in your field.
Exactly.
You're an expert in this field. You should be giving that guidance.
So
I think that
have you, oh, sorry.
Find that, sorry to interrupt, the hiring managers, I think, are looking for some evidence that their recruiters are doing a good job. So, because they have no benchmark, right? Then other than perhaps the recruiter that worked for them before. So what I find more and more and Matt, I think you nailed it. It's like building business advisors in your within your recruiters, getting them to think like strategic advisors and subject matter experts.
Right.
Is then bringing that evidence to the business that they understand the business, that they are using a holistic strategy, a many-armed approach. That sort of thing is what really brings a lot of value to the business and gets them to appreciate what their recruiters can do. Because I think what I've experienced during my career is just an incredible increase in expectations for what talent acquisition can do.
Okay. That's good.
I also think there's a lot out there now, depending on, like, I recently moved to a smaller company, and so I'm back to doing sort of Google Trend searches and, just doing Indeed searches of like, here's how many people across the Bay Area have these exact same positions open. Here is, the market intelligence, the competitive intelligence. And so I think a lot of that, you can do if you're inquisitive and find it on your own. But of course, there are all these other, like we had used at my last company, which was much larger, the different, was it like Talent Neuron through Gartner. And we also had gotten access to, for a little bit, something called Social Talent, which is actually a European company, but they cover like burst learning and they do everything sort of talent advisor and sourcing and like deep dive sourcing and stuff too. So I think, surveys of kind of what's out there, even when you're doing, like, my new team, or I've been here about a year now. So, we just have had to do it sort of grassroots because we're a smaller company. But I think if people can get into kind of just starting with even Google or Wikipedia searches on, learning about, especially, I was a scientist in a past life, but I haven't done a lot of the techniques that I search for. So I do a lot of Wikipedia reading and a lot of like, just whatever I can find. So I think when people are doing that kind of research, they get more confident also in how they can speak to hiring managers and also sort of what they can present as far as actual data. And that's one of the other things that we struggle with constantly is because I support a bunch of scientists and they don't just want me to say, well, this is what I'm seeing, viscerally out there. These people have this. or don't have this, and so it's kind of, you gotta, like you said, Brandon, like a multi-pronged approach, but is also, just sort of, I find too, for me, keeping me honest, like the weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, and of course, I do try to get away from calling it like the intake, because there's a lot of reports, of course, that say, that makes it seem more transactional and stuff. So calling it like a strategy meeting or something like that instead. So it's a lot of sort of word trickery or whatever, but to kind of get us thought of as more of a business partner than than just a recruiter or just a paper pusher.
And Brandon, I wanted to kind of to your point about data and analytics and building that credibility with your recruiting team. So we actually started, we have a recruiting ops team now, or people ops team, that really builds and draws the data from pipeline, funnel health, and all of that. And so we started having quarterly QBRs, because my team supports kind of the sales organization. And so it's important to them to see the pipeline, the funnel, the conversion rates from recruiter screen to hiring manager screen to on-site interviews. And so now I want to funnel that down to my own recruiters who own different pieces of the organization, so they can have weekly cadences with their hiring managers saying, hey, here's what I'm doing, here's my activity, here's my pipeline, here's who I'm reaching out to via LinkedIn. So I think, to your point, it is so valuable and such a value add to the partnership between recruiting and hiring managers, when they understand what your teams and our teams are doing behind the scenes, where we can show them the data points and saying, hey, we are doing all the things that we can from a top of the funnel perspective. Now it's up to the interview team to move them along through the process.
And I think too, the big thing I didn't like about agency, especially because I went into it having been a scientist, and then I was recruiting for scientists, and they were more about cold calling, and like, oh, we want you to reach out to 100 people, and it's like, well, what if I can reach out to 5 people and they're well qualified for the role because I've done my homework up front and researched the right skill sets and talked to the manager about that. For me, it's about efficiency as well in the conversion, right? The pipeline moving forward. It's not just about the blind outreach. And so I think that's also something that, I spent 5 years at a big agency, and, that's what they pushed. And I had to really, sort of convince my manager, like, hey, if I can do it without making 100 cold calls, if I can make 5 to qualified candidates and push those along, then I'm not spinning my wheels as much too, and I can actually spend more time doing the competitive intelligence research and discussing with my hiring managers, getting to know more about what the day-to-day is, and what they want and what their team needs.
Hey Matt, can you comment on the external coach as you referenced? Is it like a recruiting coach or something outside of recruiting?
So the biggest thing that I heard as a developmental need for these recruiters was the fact that they were petrified of presenting in front of an audience, whether it be a hiring manager, whether it be an audience we were talking to in a networking event, career event. And I elected to initiate getting a coach for them to come in and actually help with presenting virtually as well as in person to different types of audiences, setting up your presentation, setting up your meeting with the hiring manager, setting up a meeting with a networking group, and presenting the material in an effective way. And the recruiting team embraced it. I mean, they all mentioned the fact that that was one area that they've struggled with. And, their audience was intimidating to them. That was the biggest factor. And getting this coach and getting the help that's needed, really, it did help them to develop more with the meetings. It helped with their intake meetings. It helped with the strategies that they were setting up. And now they got more comfortable and more confident in what they're presenting.
You mind if I ask if it was a one-time thing or something ongoing?
It was a one-time, like a 4-session type of situation, but we have one-on-one meetings and so forth. But what I was taught as the manager of this team was to keep that training ongoing and to instruct the team and pieces where I could help them and they could present to me and I can witness how they're presenting and give them some coaching points around that.
Yeah, I remember when I got brought into recruiting, the version of coaching was the manager standing there to you doing this all day. If you
Right. Why aren't you on the phone?
That's right.
All right. Hey, Brandon, let's jump over to you and to your item.
Sure. So, hi, everybody. Brandon Deem, based in the Washington, D.C. area. I was COVIDed by my last employer. So, I'm actually between employment right now. But my background is primarily in professional services. I worked for PwC for around 13 years and more recently with RSM, which is a smaller version of PwC. Good news for those of you who are in the same boat. I actually have a job offer and I've got final interviews with a couple firms. So there are opportunities out there.
Excellent.
It takes a little longer than normal, right? As you guys are probably experiencing as well as recruiting leaders, driving process and procedure, a lot of questions around, do we need to fill these positions or not, and so on. So it is taking longer to get employed. But in any event.
Oh, you just hit your freeze button.
Uh-oh.
Mid-sentence.
All right, well, we wait till he gets reconnected here. Brenda, I might jump over to you. Is that okay?
Yep. Hi, I'm Brenda. I manage the sales recruiting team at Udemy. I'm based out of Portland. And one of the things that the team, the greater team of the HR and the recruiting team is talking about is really how to empower our recruiters on all of our teams, really to be more engaged and also to identify biases during on-site debrief conversations between all the interview panelists and how to identify that. Luckily at Udemy, we are a learning company, so continuous learning is our part of our DNA, and so we have different courses led by different instructors. There's one led by one of our VP of recruiting around interview training for interview panelists. We also have unconscious bias training that we make sure that everyone kind of takes. And then we want to even go beyond that to identify other ways and methods where recruiters can really be a voice of reason during those debriefs so that we can push back a little bit on the interviewers, excuse me, if we do hear biases that come up during those conversations.
Brenda, how deep, or I don't know if that's the right word, around getting the feedback back from your interviewers and your interview team? Is it kind of just like a conversational, or do you have your managers entering into your ATS process, or kind of managing that feedback from people? What are they kind of tasked with doing at this point?
Yeah, so we try to ask all of the interviewers to input feedback prior to the debrief conversations because again, we don't want their feedback in the live session to deter or again cause biases towards another interviewer and their feedback, right? So it's very conversational. If you can't make the debrief meetings that we have, we ask that you put your feedback into the ATS. And then we get together as a collective team and really discuss one by one the pros, the cons, and really assess for skill set above anything else. And each person has a competency area that they might be interviewing for. For example, one will gauge on typical culture, general fit questions. One will be more technical. One will be more cross-functional and partnerships. So everyone has a role that they play during the interview process, and it's laid out very clearly so that when we come together and do these debriefs, we have an agenda at hand and we go through each person's feedback, and then collectively as a team at the end of that we decide if it's a hire or no hire. And if there's questions around that, we can go back to the candidate and probe a little bit more to make sure we have a full understanding of their background and experience and how that can translate to the roles that we're interviewing them for.
So the recruiters are leading that conversation, or is the hiring manager?
Typically it's the hiring managers for now. And so we want recruiters to take a more of an active role in that. And I think that also comes with confidence. It also comes with the seniority of the recruiter, because I find that more junior to mid-level recruiters, maybe going into these conversations, they don't have the confidence to drive those conversations. They leave it up to the hiring manager. But oftentimes too, when I'm in debriefs with more senior level executive recruiters, I see them driving the process. So, for me, I would love to see it as a true partnership between that recruiter owning that rec in conjunction with the hiring manager to drive some of those conversations during the debriefs.
Yeah, I got to think, like, the deeper you go in a talent, right? Whether it's software engineering or Melissa, your point about science, if you don't have that science background or the engineering background in your room full of scientists or a room full of developers, kind of tough to talk because you could be, that's a lot of confidence, right? To be able to speak to something that you're not as fluent as everybody else in the room. If I'm that recruiter where I want to get to that point to consult around this, am I going into the technical points, or am I going into maybe, hey, how's this person fit in the team ensemble, so to speak? Any thoughts on that around how a recruiter can get better at managing those debriefs?
I try to stay away from the
Well,
technical
one
because
recommendation.
it's been over a dozen years since I've been in the lab. Sorry. And so I try to just more lead the discussion and wrangle the conversation if it gets off topic. Another thing that we've done is we have the eval forums, and I know somebody asked about a debrief template or form. We don't use a debrief template or form, but if everybody's kind of in agreement, I don't think we necessarily need to have the debrief. But if there are differences of opinion, sometimes then we'll go around and discuss. But I also think that um, in some groups that I've worked with, they've allowed the more junior interviewers to go first so that they're not influenced by the more senior interviewers and their perspectives. So it's kind of like a round table discussion, everybody just has a few minutes. But I try to more sort of let them do the deciding and just try to guide the discussion. Just because, I mean, I'm not, even though I was a scientist, I was, discovery, and these people are all in pharmaceutical development and stuff too. So I do try to just kind of wrangle them.
Brandon, you were going to say something?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is I am a big fan of pre-brief meetings, because what I would find is that you have these interviews that go off the rails. You have you have interviewers who have not done their due diligence, looked at the resume before the person even walks in their office. They find something that they don't like, and they zero in on that versus all the other great qualifications and qualities, or even the the targeted areas you want them to interview for. So I found that in particular, if you're going to have, there's a candidate that has something on their record that's a concern, or that you have a tough interview team, bringing them together in advance of the interview, having an honest, open dialogue around the candidate up front, and then making sure people know their marching orders during the interview leads to a better experience for the candidate and a better debrief on the back end.
Yeah, I personally would love, before I went into that debrief or pre-brief, to get that feedback to me, so I walk into that room prepared, right, to kind of any items I got to address or to help lead that conversation, to walk into that room like the room for the developers, right? Let's just say that, and you're trying to hire a developer. Yeah, I'm going to be listening and trying to direct as much as I can, try to get into that employee. Is this person a good fit versus that skill set? But trying to get that feedback back as early as possible before that conversation, I would love to have. I know that's easier said than done. Brenda, I got to ask, are your managers, how good, and this is sort of for everybody, when it comes to getting managers to get into their ATS to give that feedback in that manner, it's almost been like a hit or miss. And I've had groups of recruiters that straight up, I do not want the managers in the ATS, because then they start poking around and this and that and the other.
Well, we have different parameters in our ATS, and so unless you input your feedback, you can't see everyone else's feedback. So that's one of the restraints on our ATS that will allow that. And historically at Udemy, most of the managers, or the ones that my team works with, they're really good about feedback. They understand how important that feedback loop is, especially prior to the debrief conversations that we have. But to Brandon's point, we also have pre-briefs as well, where again, we get together before the first on-site interview. We have all the interviewers in one room. We tell them that this is the candidate. Here's what we're looking for from a job role perspective. Here are the competency areas and the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. And here are the candidates that you're going to be interviewing in these next couple of weeks. So we try to keep the candidates, if we can, due to timing, pretty close together so that we can go into a debrief conversation with not one candidate, maybe two candidates, and we can kind of benchmark, right, their competencies and who's going to be the stronger candidate, the best fit for this particular role. But obviously timing doesn't always work. But again, that whole feedback loop is so key and crucial to the whole entire process that we, if we don't get feedback within 24, 48 hours, we tend to ping the managers, and they tend to like the reminder, like, oh, sorry, we got sidetracked. I'll get that feedback in right away, type of deal. So it's not too bad where we are.
SurveyMonkey is a big one that we use. SurveyMonkey to send a link in the invites at the interview stage, and then they can respond immediately in SurveyMonkey with the amount of questions we have set up, and then we get back that survey form, which is pretty good, but we still have the debrief meetings.
Got it. Are you talking about SurveyMonkey for feedback from candidates or feedback from the interview panel?
From the interview panelists.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's kind of an interesting move for to use survey. I haven't heard SurveyMonkey used for internal feedback. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's not only used for that, but we also survey the hiring managers at the end of the interview process with SurveyMonkey to get their feedback on the recruiter. So we're using it in twofold. So, and the SurveyMonkey's actually done pretty well with it. You know, they've given us good analytics, and they've given us, we can chart it, we can graph it. So.
All right, Brandon, don't hit your desk, because I think you froze when you hit your desk when you jumped out of there.
I will try not to move. I'll keep my head tilted just right. So I'm not sure where I left off, but one of the things that I found really critical and that our stakeholders are looking for from their recruiters is good data. So recruiters, by and large, and I've been one of them for over 20 years, are not necessarily great at math, right? And not statisticians. But what I tell my recruiters as I'm training them and preparing them for these meetings is, look, you guys are storytellers, right? That's what recruiters do. You need to be able to tell a story through the data that you bring. And what I have found is that they're reluctant to do so. They don't know what stats to bring. And so I have them walk me through, well, let's take a look at what's happening in your business right now. What's working, what's not working. Tell both stories, right? Because it shows that you're using a variety of approaches. Bring, what are your yield rates? Well, bring benchmarking data so you can see where you were at this time last year, or any other relevant information that's going to be able to showcase progress that you're making with your stakeholders. Bring competitive intel. What is our competition doing? What are they doing that we aren't doing? Things like that can go a long way to building credibility with the business. The more that the recruiters are prepared to deliver that information, the better they get at doing it, right? So they do it over and over. And then they start becoming more adept at actually telling that story through data, not only to the stakeholders, but to me as their leader. And then I don't have to be digging and saying, well, why is this not working? They can come to me and say, look, Brandon, this is, so I found that to be incredibly powerful as a means of upgrading the quality of the recruiters and delivering higher value to the business.
Brandon, is that all done within your ATS, or is it kind of outside, or how's that being managed?
A little bit of both. So we were using Cornerstone, which I don't know how many people use that or familiar with it, but it was a little difficult to get data out of the system at first. We had to spend quite a bit of time configuring reports and building dashboards, still in configuration, but initially when we started working on it, it was just outside of the system. So we've moved towards more data analytics that are hand delivered on a regular basis to the leaders, and created reporting functions that we gave everybody access to, so a leader could go in and see what their pipeline looked like on a monthly basis.
It's funny that you talk about that, Brandon, because we just set up a TA or talent acquisition dashboard here, and we have a business. I think I was talking to you about it, Sean, before in one of the previous discussions. We have a data analytics, business intelligence person here in HR that actually built the dashboard for us. But just like you said, presenting it to a hiring manager about their pipeline, showing them all the graphs and pictures and all this, and we can switch up the data as needed by clicking on different things. It's really an intuitive tool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, same with us. We had an amazing team that built a dashboard for us too, that the recruiters now can leverage, and even hiring managers have access to look at their pipeline. They can do it by different dates, different orgs, specific teams, specific roles. So it gets down into the every detail of it. And so they can pull it up at any time that they want to see, how healthy their pipelines are and kind of where everything's kind of funneling through.
Yeah, ever since Tableau and those types of BI tools and I think Microsoft BI came along, when I do reporting now, I get questions asked, how do I slice this? How do I dice this? And people do it on the move too. But to your point though, being that consultant, you have to get into that business world. And if your hiring teams are in that world and that's how they see data through some type of BI tool now, and you show up with, your notes or a spreadsheet or what have you, it's not what they're used to. So that's like another area, we keep adding on skill requirements that recruiters have to do. You know, you got to know this, you got to know that. Okay, now we got to do this. Like Brandon, well, how do you tell a story around data? Not the easiest thing in the world to do. Is it back down to, hey, we have 3 candidates coming in for your rec, and that's my data story. But that's sort of like this world, the getting into the art of recruiting, I think is real interesting to see how people address that and just how you get there. Is a trial by fire? Brenda, I looked on Udemy, your website, there's like 45 classes in recruiting, or is there data storytelling in there from a recruiter's perspective? That type of learning as we go. And it's interesting to see the people who get there and those approaches. They always come back down to more focusing on the art of recruiting versus the science, in my opinion. But having that science and those numbers and the tools to do it, really interesting. Just again, another skill that recruiters need to know. Different than, sometimes you talk difference between agency and corporate recruiting. Agency, I think, is just, hey, fill that rec, give me my candidates, blah, blah, blah. But in the corporate world, to everyone's point, hey, you got to act as a consultant for the company and what have you, much, much broader. All right, Melissa, let's jump over to yours.
Yeah, and I think I was approaching it, also kind of from the perspective of my new team, because we have a few sort of more junior recruiters, and actually, I think, right, there's nothing like somebody who's just hungry to, for knowledge, for understanding, for learning, and I think, we have one person who joined recently who's got all of that. Like he didn't work at agency. He kind of went straight into corporate recruiting because he also came from sort of the science field, but he's just really eager, and I think, you can't train that. You can't train the hunger and kind of the ability to work hard, but I think it's also, right, you have to be sort of organized, which I still struggle with, but also, I think we recently did have to let someone go who was a sourcer, and we'd kind of been in a bind, and so he was kind of the one person who we were able to, get to do like a contract position for a while. But he just didn't, he didn't have that great sort of attention to detail. So he's always asking me kind of the same questions or sending me similar candidates, and me being, no, that's a small molecule guy. I need a protein guy, things like that. And so it's just, I think it comes down to a combination of being able to do the research and keep it all straight in your head, because I've also, one of my best sourcers that I ever worked with, and she's also like an executive recruiter at a big pharma company. She never had any science, degree, undergrad training, anything like that. And she was phenomenal just because she was hyper organized, hyper meticulous about, her searches. And I always think like the data that she provides, it's like, okay, I've reached out to, during this time, I've reached out to a total of 60 people for this search. I have 5 people who've gotten back to me. All these other people declined, or, for whatever reason. And she just, we would end up with these big sort of spreadsheet trackers, but it was all very useful information. Like no reload to the Bay Area, which is, most people. So I just think, you don't have to be a subject matter expert. You just have to be able to sort of know enough to be dangerous and walk the walk. But, she never pretended to know more than she knew, and she never just hesitated in really providing the data. So it wasn't about science. It was about, okay, this is the research I'm doing out in the world. This is what I'm seeing. These are the folks that I'm talking to. This is what they're making, all that stuff. So it's just really, I think also when training junior folks, like when I first got here, so that we had a TA specialist here, and they weren't asking for people's salary requirements until they would be in the interview, like in person, and they would give them like a form and be like, what are your salary expectations? In the Bay Area, you can't do that, especially with Relo, because the Bay Area salaries are, not that much higher than the rest of the country, but to live here, it costs like 4 times as much. So just, I think, it's getting back to basics, especially with more junior recruiters. but really building that foundational sort of knowledge and understanding of, yeah, it's not just doing keyword searches. It's really getting to know and understand, the groups and what you're talking about. And that's the other thing too. But, getting back to basics is having, even I've filled the same positions over and over and over and over for like QA and cell biology and stuff, and I still will have an intake or strategy meeting because I don't know what has gone on since the last time I hired, right? They might have funneled somebody into another project and there might be an opening somewhere else. And so I think it's just always the foundational conversations, but also just, you know, having people who can be who can ask the right questions and who care and stuff like that, but also who aren't afraid to, sit down and be like, explain this to me like you're explaining to somebody who's never heard about it before. And I'll still do that with some of my hiring managers, even though they know that, because they forget and they're like, oh, and I'm like, no, I want you to tell me exactly, what it is these people will be doing. So that's kind of the approach that I've taken in, it just with the one gentleman that we unfortunately had to let go. He just, on especially the highly technical and higher level positions, I just wasn't getting anything. He could help with some of the lower level or like the G&A roles, the general administrative, but it's like you need somebody who, if they're not going to be super productive on sourcing, at least accurate. And, so that it's interesting because I've had a very sort of junior team since I've joined here, but some of them do amazing work and they pick it up really quickly. It just, that hunger kind of has to be there.
Yeah, I would add to that, Melissa, like the opportunity to uptrain, right? It comes along when
Yes.
you meet new recs, a new type of skills you've got to recruit for, you're implementing new programs, processes.
Mm-hmm.
What I was kind of alluding to when we first started meeting about, nobody's talking about letting people go. Years ago when I did consulting, I'd go into corporate environments and create basically outbound recruiting and support sourcing teams or help develop sourcing teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I would get met by very experienced recruiters. And I haven't gotten this interaction in a long time like yet, but they would say things like, well, what do I say? I just call them? Like, oh, I'm here to do process and systems, not train recruiters.
Right.
But what you'd see is if they're not meeting that bar, kind of self-managing out. But when we do want to retain that person, because we all fully acknowledge, hey, this is a new skill set. And I supported Genentech sourcers and biotech for like 8 years. If you can recruit biotech in defense of your sourcers, you can recruit anything. That's
true.
crazy.
It's true.
But does anybody we had a different session, a conversation around learning, I'm calling them learning ladders, which is basically, hey, we know you're not at this level. We want to work with you to get that level.
Mm-hmm.
Let's define out the steps or steps to take to get there. And I was out at Relic. They did a very formalized process for bringing the lesser experienced recruiters up to the higher levels where it was defined out.
Mm-hmm.
Have you, for all the panelists, have you ever had in your environments where you have this defined learning? Here's where we want to get you to. Here's the time frame to do it in. Let's go.
I've done that with junior recruiters, that defining that path, but also letting them work on positions that they've never worked on before.
Mm-hmm.
In order for them to get to a certain level, they've got to step outside their comfort zone and start working on stuff that they've never had a hand in working on before. And I think that's important to develop a leadership type of role in recruitment and develop a person from a junior recruiter all the way up to a principal level recruiter, that they should step outside the box and look at positions, not just technical roles that they're used to or something like that. Work on everything. Work on all of them. Dive into things that you've never done before.
Anybody else on that one? Brandon, Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, at Udemy overall, we have a really built out just leveling framework that runs across all orgs. And so we have, biannual review cycles. We're actually going through our review cycle as we speak this week through September. So this is the time when we really have those what we call career navigation conversations with our team. There's a course on the platform for career navigation to how to navigate you as an individual, you as a manager, to help your team grow and develop. And so we constantly have those conversations to understand where the gaps are. For instance, if you're a mid-level recruiter, here's what I need you to do to get to a senior recruiter. And to your point too, it's all about just working on different level of roles, getting exposure and visibility to different executives, having that executive presence, building that confidence, and then getting more strategic, right? So when I think about a senior recruiter, for example, on my team, I want them to have a lot of strategic mindset, growth mindset, to really go into these conversations with the hiring manager and be that strategic talent partner, what we've always been kind of talking about, and then also driving decisions with data, to Brandon's point, to bring some of those things, right? And so mid-level recruiters, I often find, don't have the experience level and or the knowledge base to be able to confidently have those conversations, where a senior recruiter can kind of work autonomously and run those meetings and have those executive conversations without having their leader or manager there to help guide them, but they can kind of do it on their own. So yeah, we totally have a framework like that we leverage quite often here across the whole org.
Do you mind if I ask real quick, Brenda, do you mind if I ask, does it mirror your product at all, the Udemy product, or is it something totally separate, like learning the process and the steps?
Oh, the level of framework? No, it's something that internal that our people team has built out and our learning and development team has built out. When it comes to like the career navigation course that I was mentioning, it's on our platform. So if you're an organization that has access to Udemy for Business, we have career navigation conversations and a lot of different other courses that we all leverage internally to help us with development of our teams and kind of getting them up level to that next phase within their career.
Yeah, some of the larger biopharmas that I've worked with, they all have career ladders for TA, just like they would everything else. At the company where I am now, we're actually working on all that right now, just because we don't have that fleshed out. So across the organization, we're working on developing career ladders with the different sort of requirements or descriptions of what different people need to do to get to the next level.
Got it. I kind of wish that, but everybody talks about, hey, we're still doing resumes as a way to describe yourself. Are there other ways to do it? And along comes LinkedIn or what have you as another attempt at describing who you are. And Brenda, the reason I was asking about, hey, does it follow your product line, is because I'll tell young people, hey, if you're new to the job market, go get some type of certification in Excel and pin that to your LinkedIn profile, and make sure you bring that up in your first 10 minutes of your interview if you're at that age, to try and separate yourself from the pack. So when we do like internal trainings, I don't really see it. And I tell every vendor in our industry, hey, you should give badges if I'm an expert in your ATS. Let me put that on my LinkedIn profile. Everybody kind of laughs me off, but I'm like, I'm telling you, there's something there. Let people kind of pin that badge on themselves to show they're an expert in what the tools that they use. Haven't seen it yet, but someday I'm sure I will. All right, hey, we're a few minutes over, so I'm going to kind of go around the clock here real quick on any final comments or suggestions or thoughts. I will add before I do that, when the audience members signed up, I had a question: what do you think is a great way to bring a recruiter up in their abilities as a recruiter? And it was kind of across the board, but one that was sort of standing out was the number of times that somebody says assigned to projects. So Matthew, I think you kind of touched on that. My initial reaction to that was, well, does assigning them to a project really increase their core skills of being a recruiter? But I think Matthew, go ahead.
I gotta say, for this team to take a vested interest in what the direction of the team is going to go, and the products and systems we're going to use and processes that we're going to put in place by working on the projects to put those things in place, it's come full circle in the way that they're so excited, the enthusiasm and the development. I can see they want to do well. They want to take part in those types of projects. So those projects we have going on give them some sort of ownership to not only the organization, but to the team and to the way we do business and the best practices we're putting in place. So I really feel like you have to give them some sort of piece like that aside from their regular day-to-day. But I always revert back to my experiences as a very junior level recruiter coming up the ranks and put that in place. And when I'm mentoring and coaching these recruiters, they love hearing that. They love hearing stories about how I did something, or I learned from something, or I, made a mistake. I'm not afraid to admit of all the things that I could have done better in my past experiences and careers. So I always put that little piece in when I'm talking to these recruiters.
Excellent. All right, Matt, was that your final comment? I'm going to do
That's
that.
my final. Yeah. Thank you.
Didn't mean to make a phrase that way. Let's go around the circle. Brandon, final comment?
Look, our recruiters have a tremendous opportunity to really help our businesses grow, have a seat at the table, I think was Brenda's comment earlier, which is ideal, right? We want to train our recruiters to be true business advisors and really be valued by the business. And so whether it's through, broad flexed and cross-functional experience and exposure that way, through special projects they get assigned, through bringing better data analytics to their leaders around what they're doing, what their pipeline looks like. They're all great things that you can do to elevate the way that your recruiters are viewed within your business and showing real value and impact.
Excellent. And Brenda?
Yeah, I second Brandon on that piece of it. And, continuous learning. I think that there's always room for improvement, always evolving your tactics, your strategy, and always, challenging the business, right? And so I think, again, that two-way partnership is so key, especially in today's crazy world that we're in currently. And so really providing that value add both ways, I think is going to go a far way. So yeah, I totally agree with the rest of it, Matt and what Brandon has said.
Fantastic. And Melissa?
Yeah, I'll echo the, understanding the reason why I wanted to go in-house recruiting was to understand more about the drug development process in the business. And so, I think people, when they're in-house, do get excited about that, and it allows you to talk better, sell the company and the opportunity better for sure. So the more we can kind of talk to our, we don't have a PR department at this company, but we did have sit downs with PR to get talking points. We would have sit downs with compensation to really get deep into comp philosophy. We'd have so each of the business pieces, we'd have debriefs with like our reload team, just really understand kind of what we were looking at. So I think it's good to have those kinds of internal trainings too, so that really, as to your point, Sean, we're supposed to be subject matter experts in a lot of different things, and so the more you can leverage those internal resources to get trained up, the better.
Yeah, one thing about being in the recruiting profession is just about every company of any type of size, once you get over outside the small, medium ones, has a recruiting opportunity there to be a recruiter there. So it's almost like recruiters can kind of say, hey, I want to go recruit for this type of company, kind of have that passion around the product or service that you're recruiting for, not just making hires. So I got to think, if you got that passion in your company, that passion to learn while you're there to kind of uptick your skills, I think is like part of that package and stuff like that. And last but not least, going back to the genetic piece, I mean, you have people, recruiters saying, I'm trying to help cure cancer, and my aunt passed away of cancer. So it's personal. So you got those stories around and stuff like that. All right. Thank you, everybody, very much. I know we went a bit over, but good conversation. Much appreciated. So I will let everybody go, and thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of your week. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.